My name's Dr. Paul Brewerton, the Strengths Guy, Doctor of Psychology and Chair and Founder of StrengthScope. I podcast each week just as you're getting your head back into work mode to give you a positive, strengths-based boost into your week ahead. My podcasts are packed full of tips and tools to help you get the best out of your working week. I hope you enjoy this week's podcast. Hello and welcome to the Strengths Guy podcast with me, Dr. Paul Brewerton, founder and chair of StrengthScope, Doctor of Organisational Psychology. I am uber excited to be here today with Dr. Naeema Pasha, careers and learning and development specialist, behavioural scientist, author and futurologist. True. And this is Naeema's second time on the show. So welcome, Naeema. Thank you very much for making the time for me.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you for having me back. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Cool. Me too. First time you were on was in 2019, so before the pandemic happened, before any of that was kind of known. And we were talking about Gen Zs starting to enter the world of work. If you're interested in that, and I highly recommend you go listen to it, not watch it because this is a video conversation. Back then it was just audio, but look how we've moved on. We've learned so much in the pandemic. So look for They're Here, as in They're Here, Generation Z with Dr. Naeema Pasha on the back catalogue. So today we are fast forwarding 3 years through the pandemic, out the other side, and now into one of the most turbulent and unpredictable periods that I can remember in the world, let alone in the world of work. So what we're going to be asking today, what we're going to be posing as a question is whether leaders are ready for the fourth industrial revolution. Hold on a moment. What about the other three? When were they? Oh yeah, the first one was like looms and smash the machine. Second one, no. Third, don't know. So Naeema, we're going to have to start at some point by asking you, what were the other three? And what is even this fourth industrial revolution? Because I think that is an exciting tease for listeners and viewers. So all of those questions and more will be answered today. As ever with my podversations, I would love, and I don't remember if we did this last time, but anyway, if we did, doesn't matter. I just love you to intro yourself by talking a bit about your life to now in under 30 seconds. I mean, no, not really. You can take as long as you like. But kind of where and how you arrived at where you are today with your deep knowledge of the future world of work and your fascination and passion around that topic and all the other things that you're interested in as well. Particularly any moments you're proud of, any learnings that you've had along the way would be fantastic to hear. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much. Wow. It's always kind of like, wow, we're going to talk about myself. And then you think, well, I remember my first job at KFC when I was a student.
Do that one.
How hard that was when I was young. And then it's strange because I think when I think back to that job, and then I met my friend's daughter who's also working at KFC, and our experiences decades apart are identical. She too has the last shift where you have to wash up all the big things. So in some ways the world has changed dramatically, and in some ways it's very, very similar to experiences. But I think things I'm most proud of, the things I've worked on, is that when I started work, I originally went into after graduating, I took a year out, went around India, which was a bit of a cheat because my family are from India, so it wasn't quite the gap year experience, but still. And I went round with my grandmother on a train all around India, and we stayed in various places. I know she was really good to take me because I wanted to do the gap year, but because it's a little bit of a conservative family I came from, I wasn't really permitted to go on my own. But she didn't want to also for me to not have that experience, so I went with her. And a cousin joined us as well. Cool. And then we met lots of people who went all around into north and south, west, east. And that was a real experience and a memory. And I learned a lot about, going deeper to understand people's culture, although my background, my family Indian, but India being such a vast subcontinent, it's like going around Europe in some extent, that you understand the language in one area, but then you won't understand the language, 1,000 miles away. The food's different, the culture's, somewhat different. So learning to observe because it's quite interesting to people watch, but then learning to adapt and understand. That's, I guess, something I learned. That was the learning quite early on, which I think for young people to go traveling, it's a really good experience.
And so you didn't say what your undergrad was in, or we didn't even say what degree it was that you graduated
Oh,
with.
right. Yeah, I did food science because at one stage, because I came out, because I did really well on my course on behavioral psychology. It started back then because looking at why people chose particular products and how, and my ambition at that stage was to go in and work at something like Marks and Spencer or Cadbury's or something, and look at new product development in the marketing side and try and work where how you create a product to be attractive, how you package it, where you place it. So my final year thesis was on recreating Jaffa cakes.
Really?
Again, my finest hour. Because we had to have industrial machines in university to recreate them. So I spent a good few weeks trying to perfect that kind of orangey jelly thing. So, it's up there. It's up there.
Great story. Yeah, so that's really interesting. So the link there is going from that experience and kind of going, I'm interested in behavioral sciences and observing people and kind of understanding what makes people tick, and then going into this kind of melting pot of multiculturalism all within, that continent, as you say, and exercising those new, pre-existing skills, I guess, and passions, because they were there anyway, which is why you kind of moved towards the academic study of said topic, but still to be able to apply that.
Yes, so I didn't end up going into M&S, redesigning their food, which I'm still sad about, because part of me is like, M&S food, I could have redesigned the next next sandwich to come out.
Talk about changing the world, right?
I mean, who doesn't like? Many people may say they don't, but I think, who doesn't like a good sandwich? Like a sandwich, or
totally agree with you.
How they took over the world in terms of so these things are influential, actually. So how we choose to have lunch, who we choose to have lunch with, what we eat. So that kind of thing is still all part of the behavioral science work. Anyway, no, I didn't go and join them. I went into recruitment, as many graduates do, thinking I'll do this for a bit just to sort of learn and earn. And that made me interested in why people, it's the same questions really about why people do what they do in terms of jobs. So that's why my interest in careers, learning and development, as you mentioned at the beginning, came out. So I spent time there in different places, different universities in particular. And then I did a master's while I was studying, while I was working careers. Then I went off, ran my own business for a little while. Then I came back and joined Henley Business School, director of careers, and that's when you and I started working together. And what I wanted to do was, because I was given this remit, because everybody was very angry that I was coming in. Well, not everyone, but some people were like, what is this nonsense about somebody coming in with careers, especially the ideas I had. But I was fortunate to have a dean who just said, crack on and do what you want to do. So I was able to sort of say, well, I don't think people make career decisions, particularly from the research and understanding I have, just about, I have this set of skills, that organization needs this set of skills, the two should come together, because we make decisions, as you know, but for people listening, based on some early experiences that we may have had as childhood. There's a career theory, sort of be a bit academic at the moment, called social cognitive career theory. Sorry.
Is that yours? Is that someone else's?
It's not mine, but it's by Lent, Hackett and Brown. And they talk about, you will pitch what you want to be. I want to be such and such, based on who you think you are. Who you think you are is shaped by where you're born, what your parents expected, how you're schooled, your experiences that you had. So you may start limiting yourself if you've had experiences that haven't exposed you to things that you could think, what I could be. Whatever.
So the advice on that, I get. Sorry, go on.
Oh no, I was just going to say what the SECT theory does was say you can start shaping that. So we don't want to go. Some theories say, you just got to be, you're born into this class, race, whatever, and that's limiting, and you can try and break out of it, but it's hard. But what SCCT theory shows through the research is that when people are introduced to new experiences, the experience not just, shapes their network, for example. If you were to go on and, for a young person to do an internship, say, in a place they wouldn't do, they, of course, they've got a network. What it fundamentally does is start changing their concept of self. And they think, you know what, I could be this. I'm worthy of this. Actually, I'm not even being stretched by this. I could go further. So it's actually the experiences, and experience doesn't necessarily need to be like internship. It could be just the things you talk about, you read. So anyway, so I set the careers function up there based on this concept of SCCT, and therefore things I needed into it were not just let's get loads of information on how to get jobs, but let's start working on how people can change their self-concept, how we can improve, develop, and working with you fundamentally was critical to that, because what I wanted to do is introduce on the base of positive psychology, but looking particularly at strengths, because that is away from skills, and it's looking at these innate qualities, the strengths that we have, that we can be proud of, work on, hone, check if they get out of kilter. But all that was really important.
I love that. I actually didn't know that about the original theoretical background that led you to take that approach, that philosophy, very practically actually into Henley. And it makes complete sense of that smorgasbord of opportunity and experience that you put in front of the students, right? So giving them the experience.
We did comedy classes. That's why we did Lego, we did cartooning, all these things which will in some ways fun, so people engage with it because it's fun, and fun is a good quality to introduce into any structure process. But also what happened if you're doing a, say, stand-up comedy routine, and you are a young student that's come from China, female, who perhaps has not, and this is observational, but perhaps has not had as many opportunities in English to do a stand-up joke on Boris Johnson or something, to a group of people who are from different nationalities. That was hard, but then they go, I did that. And that gives that boost. And you need to do other things to continue it, but that's a starting point to think, maybe I can stretch myself.
I love it. So that's fascinating. And it's making me wonder, in terms of what leaders can do or need to do, and organizations, it strikes me that it's really important to be able to provide all employees, including those who are early in career, with as many opportunities as possible from as many angles as possible. So whether that be work projects or opportunities to be seconded into other teams for a period of time, or enable there to be that kind of smooth transition from team to team or from department to department, to give people the opportunity to build that flexible self-concept, right, in work. It feels like that's going to be super essential as we move into the fourth industrial revolution, which we're going to come on to talk about in a minute. Is that fair? I mean, I was also thinking it's not so relevant to work, of course, but that's true to parents, and I've always said that really our role as parents, those of the listeners who are parents, I've always seen as being put your kids, or give them as many opportunities for different experiences as you can provide, because that is then going to build up that self-concept, that self-belief that you have the agency to be able to overcome whatever challenges in front of you, which is the greatest gift you can give, I think, as a parent, as well as love, obviously.
It is the greatest gift, and actually it links well into me going to talk about the sort of history of work through the industrial revolutions, because what happens is, if you have resources, social capital itself, career capital, you have a network of people, you have the time, and you can invest your children going to a museum or going to a trip somewhere, or and you have the time to read. That there's a lot of research about, if children are read to by their parents, they can improve cognitively. If that doesn't happen, then people are more restricted, and then you can see why there are systems and structures that can hold people back, because that well off, you're not able to have that, and then that can change your self-concept. And actually it is, as exactly you say, it's that self-concept, that self-belief that can drive people forward. What happens is that people who have that, I suppose what we could also, these, if I use a word like privilege, it could be weighted in kind of political thought, and but what we know, that if you have access to resources and you don't need to think twice, that essentially is what privilege is. And now we're in this sort of as we're recording now, there's the budget that's coming out, and looking at how people in the UK, how people are looking at the cost of living, and that's going to impact some people's ability to give their children perhaps those experiences. And so those people who don't have that, those children will probably think, they're not having to think twice about going to the leisure centre, going to a museum trip, or they've got a car to get them to various places to do these things. And actually, if I link that maybe tenuously, because my work, just to talk about my story, so I left Henley, and then working more now in the field of behavioural science, because I think it's a really influential area of how we can start looking at what we need to adapt to these new challenges. The world of work, as you call it, the world of work revolution, which I think are around what we just talked about equity of opportunity for people from socioeconomic backgrounds, races, gender, sexual orientation, and cognitive backgrounds as well. We look at AI, how we look at sustainability, and I think they all kind of link back. And you mentioned at the beginning, if I go into that a little bit more, around there are these 4 industrial revolutions that people talk about at the moment, and I think it's linked exactly to
well,
what
you
said.
talk about them. I haven't. I've got to say, like, we move in different circles, because I wasn't aware that we were at number 4. But please do explain.
Oh, really?
No.
Oh, I can hear it. We're the 4th industrial revolution.
No, like our leaders ready for
4th IR right here, actually.
What is this?
Okay, let's dive deep, because this is fun, a little bit of history about where we are in terms of work. So the 4th industrial revolution, 4 IRs, some people call it, who are really cool, not me, so I'm not
all these people. I need to find out more. Thank you. I'll do the work after today.
I know. 4th industrial revolution, they think, is where we are at the moment, started about 20 years ago, but really grown in the last 10, 15 years, in particular around artificial intelligence and intelligence coming into our life. And that's from robotics, that's, ideas around autonomous vehicles. But, these are kind of, perhaps a little bit far-fetched, but we've also got AI everyone's got massive amount of AI in their phone. We're using AI at the moment through Zoom. There's all the kind of Alexas and all this sort of thing in our home, and then that's going to perhaps progress into the fridges being more AI, and in our and hospitals, for example, using perhaps AI to identify illnesses, as well as looking at treatment. So we're in this sort of space of AI, and that's why it's called because of the impact. So commentators on revolution say it's something that's going to like really push something forward, and so the acceleration that we will have in society of AI adoption is big, and we were already noticing it already. But the first 3, as you talked about, spinning jennies and so on, and steam engines and things. So we can go back to 17. So this is a little history lesson. 1760 to 1820 was the first industrial revolution, with the impact of steam and steam trains and things. So you were able to track that technology. It really improved manufacturing, and started with transportation and connection. And it really, you can, if you go back to our history, thinking how it started revolutionizing countries, and how having urban centers set up, that came again with the further massive boost with the introduction and invention of electricity, and how that started booming. That's around 1820 to 1900. People talk about
the second industrial revolution, is it?
The second, yeah. And that's when you saw the second industrial revolution really with manufacturing being really pushing forward. Now, although it came to 1900, moving forward into that mass manufacturing, Henry Ford, car production, and then we saw medicine, investment in medicine. So the corporations that we see now working on vaccines, that we see what we've just had through the pandemic, is everyone's been vaccinated through the technology that was set down in the industrial revolution. And then the third one, which is one that you go, oh, I didn't know that. People talk about computing itself. So
I was going to say computers. I
you?
was honestly going to say that. So when would you date that? Like the
Headwards to you.
70s? Huh?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the actual and invention of the World Wide Web and things, whether how
Okay.
things started connecting. And the thing I wanted to sort of say, if we were to look at some of these, the impact, some of it has been accelerated our society. It's created, particularly in the second industrial revolution, and indeed the first, but the kind of focus on technology, science, progress being really critical. And then as we moved into like the 1900s and around the beginning of the computing, like you said about the 70s, do you remember out of town centers started coming? Taylor. So the car was king, that we would have like revolutionized how we're shopping. We'd have like articles that you drive out with the family and go to one of these centers. There's supermarkets started coming in the 70s where it was smaller shops, so you'd go in and get all your stuff in one place. So all this, we think this is at the time, much of this is good, but what it also created is differences in society. So if you could access to medicine, access to education, but then if you go into urbanization started growing, so then you'd have different areas, and people's concept of leadership, particularly for these things, actually started back when those big companies were started being set up, such as Ford, coming through from that. So if we imagine what leaders look like then, we still kind of imagine that they are the same now. If we look at what happened through the invention of the first and second industrial revolution, and indeed the third industrial revolution, about cars, transport, consumer demand, consumerization. If we all had to get our, we could buy our strawberries in December because consumers needed it. The product should be uniform. If you nip round Asda, we were expecting cucumbers to be of a particular shape and style. This is also seeded where we are at the moment now with sustainability and how we look at that. So we can think, so for what leaders need to consider while we're at this threshold of really adopting AI, if we look back at the first three industrial revolutions and the great came from them, we can also see quite massive devastation for impact on the planet, impact around how we've not tackled diversity, how we've not looked at particular things, inequality we talked about, which is why this links back to what we were saying about the careers service that I set up. If you believe you can, you will, that kind of Latin saying, that can help if you've got the ability to think that you can do these things. And what happened with some of these structures and revolutions and workplaces is that it created more difference. So what we have now as leaders is if we're now adopting AI, digital adoption, which has the impact to remove jobs, change jobs. If people are not particularly, this whole talk of autonomous vehicles, which is a bit kind of, we don't know if it's going to happen really because a range of things. But say if it did, where are all the drivers going to go? Where are all the train drivers, truck drivers, transportation people? Where are they going to go? We're going to train them all as coders. We've just got to think carefully. With this, we have the opportunity to think carefully now because we've seen the history of what we do in the fourth industrial revolution to create perhaps leaders thinking we'd rather use this opportunity to create good as well as the way we can.
Yeah, so that kind of brings me back to that question around mindset shift, right? The need for leaders to kind of change. The context has changed and is changing all the time. So it feels like you're advocating for leaders to adopt a new mindset, a new perspective in the way, I mean, it's not just philosophical, it's very practical, right? So bringing it into you know, a leader's consciousness, someone who's currently operating as for example, middle manager in a retail bank, right? Or, you know, a senior exec in a pharmaceutical business. What is it that you're suggesting they need to do or think differently, you know, in order to be ready for this fourth industrial revolution?
The research that I put in, and actually it's in my book, which we forgot to mention. Let's do that now, quick.
Well, I did mention you're an author, but an author of what?
Well, the next book I'd like to be a cookbook because
Excellent idea. I can fully advocate for your cooking. Yes, do that.
Oh yes, of course.
Oh yes.
Okay. So this book I co-wrote with Shahina Janju Jivaraj, who was also at Headley, but has now moved to HEC Business School. We wanted to do something around enabling people to work on their career with all this thing that's going on. So it's called Future Proof Your Career: How You Can Lead and adapt to this new world of work. In there are particular things we talk about, or that's come through from the research I did about what we need to do. And one of the things is, I know it's really obvious, but let me say it anyway, is that and we're going to talk about generational differences, but what you might be if you're a middle manager or senior manager, you might be of the generation which is perhaps a Gen X, somebody from baby boomer generation, or even a millennial. So therefore, we've all got used to paces of change, and we've got used to adaptation. But what the work on the Industrial Revolution stuff that we talked about and future work is showing that the pace of change, the data suggests the pace of change is speeding up. If we just look at the pandemic and that kind of huge kind of experience that the world went through, the adaptation to change was swift. If you look at education, which I was back then working in, we moved into online delivery, as did every school, college, university around the world. And we did it just my own experience. We moved to online in 2 weeks. It would have taken 20 years at least for it to get through a committee to say we can start looking at online delivery, to this kind of scale. It just wouldn't have. So the pandemic forced us into do something. So this pace of change, so people having to learn to work online, hybrid, all these kind of things, using technology, using mobile technology, 5G, all this just sped things up a lot. So one of the qualities that's needed to talk about a lot is this ability to adapt, the ability to be comfortable with change. And who is? Nobody is. But I think, and even though I'm going through my own career change at the moment, but knowing how uncomfortable it feels to experience change and uncertainty, but how we, and as I say, I'm learning through that myself, have to understand how that process can be enabling and how you move forward and how you can harness the things that you see, the opportunities to move ahead. I think that's one of the key things that we talk about, and I'd say that's really critical for leaders to know, have that focus on where you want to go, but no, adaptation is
so adaptability, being willing to flex and learn and grow. So I suppose adopting a growth mindset as well. Failure is inevitable. That's okay. That's all part of learning, and making that okay and safe for people as well as themselves. So, creating conditions of psychological safety for teams so that you're able to continue to innovate and thereby adapt, I guess, is all part of this. Anything else in terms of leadership mindset shifts from your point of view? So adaptability, number one.
Adaptability, number one. Well, in my it sounds so cheesy to this. In my book, I talk about a model that I talk about for around career uncertainty and adapting to it. So adaptability, of course, is critical. But underneath that, the things I've sort of dug out from the research was a few qualities which I can whiz through now, which I think are quite interesting. Being able to be analytical was really interesting. So I think, and it came through as really quite high with people who are able to have that kind of ability to work and be successful in uncertainty. So it's like taking a review of your world, the
Mm.
environment you're
Mm.
in, a small environment to what you're doing to be outside. So being able to regularly doing analytical sweep of what's
Mm-hmm.
going on
Mm-hmm.
is really important. And good leaders, such as yourself, would be we would probably innately do that, because I think it links to having curiosity, and that we're all being super curious all the
But
time.
also, I mean, it's being evidence-based as well, right? So making sure that you're not just kind of adapting to the next voice you hear or the last voice you heard, but actually looking, in the round at what is it that's being said here and there and here and there, and then, summating that and then making a decision as to how to move forward. I think that being evidence-based has got to be part of that, being
That's
effective.
exactly it. And that was essentially part of what being analytical is. So being able to do that, and then making some critical thinking and decision making around what's there. And you can't always get it right. I always talk to the MBAs when I do my opening workshop with them when they start the MBA, which is really exciting at the beginning of this journey. And I showed them this video of the previous CEO of Microsoft, Steve Ballmer, talking about the Windows Phone, and he's laughing at the iPhone. It's a great little thing. You can find it on YouTube. And he was going, who would pay, I think he says $500 for an iPhone? That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Why would you want to do that? We've got a very good Windows mobile phone for $100. It does everything. And then we're all chortling away. But then you think, and he's the CEO of Microsoft. So I think we all can make, what I'd show that is to say, we can do the analysis and we come up with what we think is right at the time, but we can't always be right. And it's having that ability to go, you know what? Yeah. I can't do that. So and that is growth mindset.
Right. And there's an element of humility in there as well, right? It's being prepared to own, when you got it wrong, when you thought something was probably right, but you got it wrong. And own that and learn from that. That is absolutely, you're right, growth mindset, but that also requires people to be humble rather than to stay strident and positional in the face of contrary evidence, right?
Because everything goes full circle. Jeff Bezos talked about, and this is a few years ago, he said, Amazon will fail. Nothing is permanent. So we'll go through a perception thinking this is like, monolithic, it will never go. But how many organizations that we remember from the 80s, 90s, pre-pandemic have gone because of...
I think that's an amazing thing. I didn't know that he'd said that. That's such a powerful thing to say, because it forces you to stay in the now, right? Because if you're thinking you'd make assumptions that you can become complacent very quickly, I think, as a leader, assuming that everything is going to stay static when that's the last thing that's true. And things move around so quickly in every possible sphere of your experience as a leader. So making the best of now is got to be an important part of being an effective leader, as well as a lot of stuff about analyzing and looking back and looking forward and considering what the future holds as well.
Absolutely. And there's three other things. Well, I'll just pick up one of those four qualities in this, but let me just pick up one, because I think it came up so high in the researchers, is self-reliance. So those people, it came from my work I did on career resilience specifically. I was looking at that. And it was people who believe they can, having that ability to think, I am self-reliant. So for leaders, again, and this is how organizations are changing, where you're in a leadership space, and I know you're like this with your own leadership style, is that when previously we would have expected, particularly in large corporations, well, someone else will do that. Well, that's not in my job description, or I'm not sure I'll be able to do it. And that creates, obviously it creates a bit of safety. You think this is my kind of job description, quite clear, and that's quite comfortable. But on the other hand, you're kind of wary of where you can go. And what I found in the research is those people who are self-reliant, who focus on themselves, to think, I can make the changes, I can build relationships that can take me to perhaps the next stage, to network effectively, to have ambition, but not necessarily ambition to sort of like, I want to rule the world, but ambition to say, I can stretch this a little bit further, I can be curious. And that's the other kind of thing. So having those two, like analytical skills and self-reliance, so I'll just pick out those.
Fantastic. And so for people who are interested to learn more, they can find your book where?
Well, it's available at all good bookshops. it's probably it's on Amazon, and it's
Yeah,
called Future Proof Your Career.
perfect. And
It's
why
more,
you don't have it next to you so you can hold it up to the camera? Oh, maybe you do.
I do have it somewhere, but I'm not going to get it because it's going to fall.
Everything else will fall down. Yeah,
Everything will fall from my bookshelf, so
I
I
love
don't
it.
have it to hand.
No, that's fantastic, and highly recommended, right? Like that stuff
Yeah,
that you've just shared is so powerful for leaders to recognize that, not only is this mindset shift required, but that it is doable. Like practically speaking, these are things that you can develop.
well,
You already are.
absolutely.
Like there's no question. Context is forcing leaders to have to move in that direction anyway. So just keep going but be aware that these are qualities that are going to stand you in good stead, for a good few years to come.
I mean, I could 100%. Are they doable and creatable? Because sometimes we think we're going to, if you're not you're not innately creative or curious or something, you can't do this. But you will know from your pioneering work on strengths that you can work on key strengths that can enable you to do better where you are and where you want to go. So look at those and other ones that can perhaps balance out the ones that you think important. And in fact, what I would say specifically underline is that we did some research at Henley in the World of Work Institute that I was happy to set up at Henley. Was I looked at what will happen or what is happening in the world of AI assistance. So your your Alexas and all the kind of things that people Siri's and everything. So because they're going into the workplace, so there's investment, billions going into people, those organizations looking at how they can come into the workplace rather than just checking out how old an actor is when you're watching a movie, which is what I tend to do, or the weather, or get it to play some songs. It's just the three things I tend to do. But anyway, they're going to come to the workplace, and what we found is that they will give us back 12 working days in any organization because they're going to take away some of the routine tasks and various things will be done by these AI assistants. And then I always wonder what we should do with those 12 days. And a lot of people say, well, work, you could do a combination of things like go on holiday, just take it back to yourself, hoping that the employer is going to give you those 12 days. That's a question mark. But say if they did. See, what I would really recommend is, first of all, some of your well-being to focus on that. But I would say learning is critical. So, and learning, it doesn't mean, right, I've got to go and learn how to do coding. But 12 days a year, if you're able to start thinking about that now, that's just a day a month, isn't it? That you focus on your skills. Some of those skills, as you talked about, is growth mindset. I don't know many people who are naturally growth mindset who look at failure and think, do you know what, it's a learning experience, or who look at thinking I am measured by my output and success. I don't know many people who do that. So I would say even a day a week to work on a growth mindset as training would be good.
And actually, on that, sorry, there is, sorry to interrupt, but there is, just briefly on that exact point, there is a podcast. It is one of the most downloaded podcasts on the Strengths Guy back catalogue, and it is around how you can develop a growth mindset. And I think that's why it's so downloaded. It's because it's something that the majority of people don't feel that comfortable with, not really sure how to do it, but there are practical steps that you can use. So I would recommend, I don't have off the top of my head where it's at, but if you just search for growth mindset, you'll find it. I agree with you fully. I think that's a brilliant thing to work on in and of itself. Just developing that comfort with risk and failure.
I think so. And I think when I hear talks on growth mindset and Carol Dweck's work is amazing. Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety, amazing. But you need to go into it. They've put years into it, so it's not something I think we really feel that in order to do it, we have to work on it because it's not something. And I'm not a growth mindset person. I was looking back at failures.
It's quite weird actually. Two kids, and one of them is very much that way inclined naturally. And I just find him a complete inspiration. And the other one, I also find a complete inspiration because, that's just how parenting is. But he definitely is more fixed mindset in the way that he approaches things. And I think the
Yeah.
majority of people absolutely are, that way. It's kind of wanting to get to a place and then stay there and protect yourself and, just get to a point of attainment, but don't push yourself further for fear that you might fall. That's a completely natural response. So, to develop that and to work on that and to know that that's possible, I think that's a fantastic message. So thank you. I'm conscious there's other things that we want to talk about. What would you focus on most in terms of answering that question? Leaders ready for the fourth industrial revolution. Where do you want to go?
I thought we talked briefly last time we spoke about the generational differences.
Yeah.
I think we kind of link into what we're saying, because leaders needing to know about the changes that are coming up. So there's things I mentioned, that the AI skills have changed, the adoption, how we need to adapt, being kind of like cognizant of the environment, having that analytical mindset, the kind of growth mindset, how you can start developing, particularly if you want to develop yourself. Reliance, because that came through my research, is really critical. And the other things that are coming through are diversity. And the research I did, the big piece of research, and you asked me at the beginning what I'm most proud of. And one of the things I am very proud of is being able to head up the research on race equity at Henley, which is very influential paper. But what it showed was those organisations that invested in race equity, practical measures, had a 58% higher revenue than those that didn't. And it was a big study. Yeah. So, and it kind of like makes sense if everyone feels they can participate, that they're valued, that kind of, they're going to be happier. They're going to, perhaps have more ideas, be innovative. Their psychological safety will improve because they don't being watched or excluded and so on. So I think actually diversity is critical, and then diversity, not just but to include fundamentally the protected characteristics, race, gender, sexual orientation, and age, and all those things are important. In addition to look at things around how we look at generational differences as well, because what younger generations growing up with, we talked about Generation Y, who just started the workplace when I spoke to you, because I think they're around 24, 25 is the kind of upper end of a Gen Z, I think, or 26. So they're in the workplace. They went through the pandemic, and now they are, some of them studying online and then coming into the workplace. And what they talk about, and the researchers at Henley, was that they're very values based, and we see that in a lot of things that we have. We're all value based, but they put it in the sense that there's some data that came through recently that the no shows for graduate recruits is quite high because of that. They just don't turn up on the first day. It's like, wow, this is just like in Gen X and baby boomer time was just unheard of. But very rare. But they just don't. No, it's not for me. So, but when we're moving, as you talked about, is that we talked about Gen Y then, and how they want workplaces to be places for social glue. That workplaces aren't just where you go do stuff and then you go back again. It's there where you create relationships, where you perhaps want social activities as well. And that's because the influences that we have. When we look at Gen Alpha that's coming up, that we talked about briefly, they are, I think they are, looking at my data, they're quite young at the moment, aren't they?
Yeah. They're
2010, isn't it? 2010 is the...
That's right.
Yeah.
Which interestingly splits my two sons, which clearly, so, which is an important point, right? Because actually the reality is that there's 2.5 years between them. Are they really going to have that much of a different experience growing up? But they could, but it is also an important point that there is going to be significant difference within these groups, and that's, in terms of accommodating diversity for leaders, it's really important to meet the person where they're at, understand their motives, their values from a personal perspective, rather than assuming that they're going to have a certain way of looking at the world just because they're part of a particular generation. But yeah, you're right. 2010 is the, that's what I read too.
So, and you and I both psychology backgrounds, and I remember you talking about. I think you did some work on, I remember what you actually said. Your statement actually was that essentially, as people, we're still who we are from the savannah, from the early savannah, from primitive times. So, generational differences are perhaps things that we all have. So, what you and I have spoken about before, it's not that we are a different species are from a different age group, and you talked about the 2 years between your sons. What the work on generations, and this comes back to almost my work on behavioral science when I was looking at chocolates and things. It's about, because marketeers are very interested, it's the influences that happen to us through life. So baby boomers growing up post-war, Gen X going through the Cold War and recession in the UK, Thatcherism, polls, was it poll tax strikes, and then millennials going through 9/11 and having a different approach, and then Gen Z is going through the pandemic has been quite formative as well. And
definitely,
it's not them as people being different; it's the formative experiences.
Exactly right.
Yeah. So that I think that's what because sometimes we forget, because some of this is partly young people. If we're talking about young people, how they are and how they are, but some of it is about the experiences that people have that is different to what other generations have. Pandemic experience is going to shape people very different, and Gen Alpha will have experienced, and the research, for example, is that people who are older, Gen Zs, Gen Zs, millennials, X's, and so on, are less worried about illness than Gen Alphas. Early research on these younger people.
Interesting. Yeah, unsurprising, right?
Unsurprisingly, yeah. Being able to communicate socially, having very good experience of a different type of social media. We talk about TikTok and other kind of things coming in, very interactive, being able to have to make very snapped, because if you're scrolling through TikTok, as we all do, so we're all developing these things, but you're younger, so this is shaping your thinking, thinking, no, I like that TikTok, I don't like that TikTok, and making it a few seconds to make that impact. But those TikToks have got to make an impact very quickly. You've got a short period, a bit longer than they used to be. So, but they're making critical decisions of what they consume through social media that we would, previous generations would have taken a long time, would have been, Gen X's were called the MTV generation because saying that we could only have 15 minutes of focus, because the MTV adverts would come in, and you'd watch a news video, then the actual adverts would come in. So, but that seems like ages now, 15 minutes to focus on something.
Yeah, wow. Exactly. And that's you say for leaders, capturing the attention of Gen Alphas and retaining that is going to require a new, maybe new mindset. It definitely requires some thought, in terms of how younger workers are seeing the world, interacting with the world, and what their expectations therefore are going to be, as to the organizations that they work in, where they're employed. They're going to expect there to be a high level of personal tailoring to their requirements, because that's what they've grown up with. That's what their phones and what their devices provide for them. And that's been true of Gen Z too, but I think Generation Alpha is going to be even more the case.
They will be. They're predicted to be the most tech savvy, in some ways most wealthy. That's some of the research that's come through, and obviously using different ways of consuming technology, and obviously technology that will happen through that from now going on, particularly that's going to, through mobile technology, how that changes 5G in the home. They're going to have a different approach. What I would say though is both with millennials and the Gen Ys and the Gen, but particularly with Gen Zs, what they can see around them in terms of stability in the workplace is very different to, certainly different from boomers, which is what workplaces are still built on, secure work, but the pretense of almost a secure workplace, to what they see, it's not a secure workplace. It's not. And when you see organizations using languages like, we're a family here, we're here, we've got this kind of purpose and we want to do this and look at that, and then they lay off, like we see in the tech at the moment, we're going through tech recession a little bit, aren't we, with people being laying off? But those are the organisations that had, you can come in, you can have your lunch here, you can have a bit of table tennis, you can go down a slide, you can chill out with your friends you'll make here, and in many ways, you know, we're about the planet, we're doing this, so you're tied in some ways with those kind of connections that you probably would have with family. If you've got personal psychological connections, psychological, the contract, your work, your psychological contract that you've researched, Paul, when they're severed by corporate decisions, like we've got to make cutbacks, we've got to do this, we're doing that, it's quite hard for people to do. And I think the important thing is for organizations to give decent messages and to recognize Gen Y, Z and Alpha are more immune to the kind of, you know, superficial brand messages.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. We have come to the end of our time. I would love for you to just say what's the best way to get in touch with you if people would like to do that, and why wouldn't you want to do that? Everyone wants to do that.
I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn. Just look for Dr. Naeema Pasha.
Perfect.
It'd be great.
Amazing. And I was going to ask you about resources. We'll put them on the show notes. And of course, the main resource required is your book. So yeah, I think we know the name of that. So we're all good. Naeema, it's been amazing. There's so much more we can talk about, and I'm sure we will do this again. But until that time, I would like to say thank you very much. Really appreciate it.